Welcome into the Vandy Sports post-game reaction. Alongside Joey Dwyer, I'm Billy Derrick as we come to you live after Vanderbilt's 30-27 loss in Columbia in double OT to the Missouri Tigers. Joey, I'll give it to you for your initial thoughts. Neither of us were there, so obviously when we're not there, it's a slightly different perspective, but still being able to watch that game. What did you take away, and what did you learn about this team tonight?
And it was a heartbreaker for Vanderbilt. I thought that would have been Clark Lea's signature win. That would have been Vanderbilt's crown jewel, but they fell just short. And I thought they did enough to keep themselves into the game, but they just never got over the hump, especially on that last drive, enough to win that game. I think Mizzou is the better team. They're the more experienced team, and they're playing in an environment that obviously suited them. And it just felt like they had this game, even if it didn't feel like it in the moment. You just always kind of thought Mizzou's got it in the bag somehow, some way. And I think they just know how to win a little bit better than Vanderbilt does at this point. Vanderbilt, you can't leave Luther Burden in one-on-one there in overtime. And Clark Lee said he wanted that one back. Obviously, he wanted that one back. I do think it's a step that this program has talked, especially post-game, about how they're heartbroken, but they don't want to be defined by moral victories. They don't want to define this as a moral victory. Because I think it'd be easy to for them. It's the number 17 in the country. It's on the road. I think that's a step there, but I don't think anybody wants to hear that. Vanderbilt didn't do enough down the stretch to win this game. Brock Taylor's got to hit that kick, but there's also a lot of other things that could have determined this game and could have swung it in their direction. You just think, what if this was different? What if this game was at First Bank Stadium instead? What if the offense doesn't have 7 3-and-outs? There was so much that could have been different in this game that wasn't, and I don't think it's fair to blame it all on Brock Taylor. He hit the 57-yarder, the longest in program history. Just feels like there was a lot of good today, but ultimately it's probably going to be overshadowed by the final result, Billy.
Yeah, I think so. Vanderbilt obviously puts up a heck of a fight to go on the road against a top 10 team. And again, what a lot of people say was now Missouri's not, they're not a top 10 team. Well, we'll see. I still think Missouri's a very good team. I think a big difference in tonight's game, Joey, were a couple huge defensive miscues, whether it's penalties, big plays. Overall, Vanderbilt's defense, I'm not going to sit here and say they had a good day, but I also thought this defense had some really good moments. So it's hard to talk about this defensive performance. That's why it's taken me so long to write this defensive report card. But I look at the penalties as a big difference. 8 penalties for 93 yards. Missouri played a lot cleaner and more disciplined football game. 3 penalties for 33 yards. I'm not going to sit here and say that's the difference in the game, but that was a huge part in the game. And then over to the offensive side, Joe, you're 4 of 14 on third downs. That's not going to win you many games. Now, Missouri wasn't a whole lot better. They were 7 of 17, but at one point, I think they were 6 of 11. So they were keeping drives alive, while Vanderbilt simply could not. You look at. I thought there were some positives that, like you said, will get overshadowed. Whether it was, the way I thought Cedric Alexander ran hard. He didn't have a huge day in the stat sheet. 11 carries, 52 yards. I thought he had that 31-yard run that was really impressive. Pavia, again, he did enough, I thought. Now, again, that last throw there on the OPI to Sherrill was and I'm not going to sit here to say that was a bad throw, Joey, but at that point in the game, you feel like something better maybe could have been drawn up. When I look at that, and again, hindsight's 2020. If Sherrill finds a way to catch that ball, we're not sitting here talking about that. But and we have a good comment here from Kennedy, which I'll get to here in a second. But for me, Joey, I just keep going back to the penalties. And we talked all week about this team has to be more disciplined. This team has to play cleaner football. Well, they didn't. I mean, they really didn't. The same penalty problems kept popping up. And you can say, man, that's a stupid call, or that shouldn't have been called. Well, it was. And, you saw there were a couple other sideline late hits. That one on Langston Patterson, that was close. Could have been called probably, but it was close. So I just think a big story in the game were Vanderbilt's penalties and their mental mistakes. But overall, and I tweeted this, this is an encouraging sign. I think overall for this team moving forward. And again, you don't, as a fan, you don't want to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. That's the mindset that Clark Lee wants to eliminate. But let's face it, Joey, that they're 2-2. They're a 2-2 football team, and they're going to have to find ways to win. This was still a week where they could have easily come out here and pitch their tent, completely gave up, but they didn't. They lost by 3, gave up, put up a good fight. But I can't talk about this game without talking about the penalties. And Clark Lee talked about that right at the beginning of his presser, and we'll get that uploaded. But penalties, Joey, that hasn't improved, and until it improves, this team is still gonna be hard for them to win games. So the penalties were huge for me.
I thought the run defense was also a huge story. I think the penalties, man, they killed them at the beginning of some of those drives too. The rushing by Missouri it was almost unfathomable that Vanderbilt was still giving that up. Nate Noel ran for 199 yards on 8 yards a carry. I mean, you can't win trying to defend like that, right? Mm-hmm. Vanderbilt should have eliminated that in the past. They allocated a lot of resources towards the defensive line over the summer. Obviously, Zaylen Wood wasn't out there, and I think that would have made a difference. But you've got to be better in the run game. I mean, Mizzou, for a lot of that game, Clark Lee talked about in the second half how they kind of got into more of a rhythm stopping their run. I think the damage was already done. They had their longest play of the season off of a run play that was, I think, just an inside zone up the middle or something along those lines. I can't fully remember what it was, but Mizzou really didn't have a whole lot of answers through the air. They didn't have the explosive passing game that I think Vanderbilt's going to see throughout a lot of the year. They've struggled to have that for much of the season. I think the most explosive one was the overtime touchdown at Burden, but they just didn't do enough in the run game, and they couldn't make Mizzou play with their left hand and take advantage of their inability to throw it down the field like maybe Mizzou had hoped. I think that's a big story for me is just, man, they could not stop the run at all. And I think Vanderbilt just had too many 3-and-outs, the time of possession. I don't know if it's as drastic as the total plays ran. Mizzou ran 77, Vanderbilt ran 59 or something along those lines. I think it might have been 53. Let me take another look, but it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Where is it? 77 to 59. It's hard to win that way, especially against a ranked team on the road that's older, that's been together. I don't know that Mizzou is a top 4 team or anything like that, but they're pretty freaking good. And if they're running that many more plays than you and you're having that many 3-and-outs, they didn't turn it over, which I think was a positive, but the line I thought had stretches of poor play, including penalties, although I thought they moved the guys around a little bit in the run game. Thought Pavia moved with his legs well. Joseph McVay was obviously a huge bright spot coming in and making the explosive like we saw throughout camp a lot of the time, but they just didn't have quite enough to get over the hump. Eli Stowers was really good. I thought Pavia was the offensive MVP just because of kind of the way he willed them to stay in that game, and they responded in the first overtime with the touchdown to Gabe Fisher, but Billy, just not enough. And I think the big stories, like you said, the penalties, I think the rushing defense was a big story. The third downs, I mean, you can't win that way against a team like Mizzou, right? And also just the amount of 3-and-outs over and over again, you're getting up there and you're just stalling a drive when you need to be a ball control offense. They almost had a different blueprint in the first half. They had an explosive, and they didn't have a whole lot of ball control, long drives that shortened the game. I think they shortened the game a little bit, but they didn't control the time of possession, and they had an explosive, which isn't kind of how this team is built, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing. It actually kept them in the game. They'd a lead at halftime, and I think that's, if you're going to look for a moral victory, one of them, but ultimately just not good enough to come out with something, and easy to wonder what could have been with this team today. I think, again, this could have been Clark Lee's crown jewel of a win, and you wonder if something went differently, if it could have been different, but now they're going home to Nashville empty-handed with nothing to show for their effort, Billy.
Yeah, and Pavia talked about that after the game. He said, we're inches away. We are right there. We just got to clean up some of the small things. And, I would agree with that. I think a big problem with them right now is, the margins are small. It just almost feels like they don't realize that, certain players on this team are certain, just at certain points in the game, they're not as talented as Missouri. They're not, they're a bottom 3, 4, 5 team in the league at this point. And I think these last couple losses have probably instilled that into them, that they've got to be even more laser focused than they were this week. Last week, they obviously really struggled focus wise. They almost won the game. But it's almost like these last couple losses, Joey, have proven, at least to me, that, and we knew this going into the season, that the margins are small, but I think it just reaffirms that, okay, they were that close, but still, the margins are tiny here for this team. And, I'm glad you mentioned Missouri. It did feel like Missouri, almost no matter what happened, was going to find a way to win that game. They're far and away the more talented team. The receiving core, I think, is one of the better receiving cores in the league. They didn't necessarily, Missouri played a bad game. I mean, Missouri played a bad game. The special teams, that kicker missed 3 field goals. The decision-making right before the half was very mind-boggling. Vanderbilt hits a 57-yard field goal. But even after all those, after those 3 missed field goals, even after the mistakes that Missouri made, and even their lackadaisical effort, they won by 3 in double overtime. Mm-hmm. So Missouri, they are that much more talented. And so I think they might have learned, okay, we can win this way, but this was against Vanderbilt. I think what they probably learned is that we can't beat a top half SEC team playing like that. And I think we've learned about this team. Offensively, we talked before the season about the receiving core, how they just don't have a ton of options there. I think it's proven out that Stowers is the go-to guy. 7 catches again tonight. How about Joseph McVay? We had that 65-yard touchdown. Didn't really try another look at him deep throughout the rest of the game, which I thought was interesting. I'm sure Missouri was keeping a close eye on him. Joey, did he play another snap after that?
Who's this again? Sorry.
McVay.
I don't remember another snap. I don't remember another time seeing him really on the field all season besides that. I think that was just trying to include him there because he was for that play.
Right. And then, you look at Sherrill, 1 catch for 17 yards. Skinner, 1 catch for 9 yards. Cole Spence, 1 catch for 12 yards. I think that's what has to change, Joey. Mm-hmm. They've got to find something in the passing game. You can't rely on Pavia to run it and Cedric Alexander to carry the load. Teams will load up on that. I mean, so I think that's another takeaway tonight, that the lack of receiving options, I think, has started to catch up to them, and they've got to find a way to get those guys the ball. Quincy Skinner's got to have more than a catch, and so does Sherrill. I don't know how they do it, but they're gonna have to find a way. And another thing to watch tonight was the batted passes, which I thought was interesting. I think that's probably it's got to be the most batted passes Pavia's had in a game so far. I know there were a couple against Georgia State and a couple against Virginia Tech, but there were a lot of those tonight. So the passing game, if they're able to get a few more catches from Skinner and Sherrill, maybe the game's different. So, and Missouri knew that, and every team's going to know that as well. So it's going to continue to be hard. But Pavia missed Skinner pretty wide open on a couple occasions. We had a comment about that, but Joey, I think, after the penalties, the next, I think, concern for me is the lack of the passing attack. There's just not enough.
There isn't enough, and it's not even as much of a Pavia thing as it is a receiving core thing. Clark talks a lot about how they're going to get one-on-ones in these games, and they're not going to be able to completely insulate themselves from those. They've got to win some of them. Quincy Skinner's got to go beat an SEC corner once in a while. Junior Sherrill's got to win a one-on-one in overtime or something along those lines. Cole Spence has got to win a one-on-one. I think Eli Stowers is the only guy I'm trusting at this point to fully go and do that. And I think that's a huge red flag with this team. Maybe they try to involve Cedric Alexander out of the backfield a little more, maybe AJ Newberry. I think they tried to do that a little bit today. But when Joseph McVay is the only guy who's really making a splash in the receiving game, I think you've probably got some issues there. And we've known that for a long time. I mean, Loic Fouonji, I think, was their prized receiver transfer. I didn't even see him on the field tonight. Darian Wiley, I didn't see on the field tonight. They just don't seem to have enough there. And I think that's going to kill them because they're not always going to be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat, Joseph McVay streak 56 yards for a touchdown. Teams are going to catch on to that, and they're going to insulate themselves from that. Vanderbilt has to be able to win one-on-ones on the perimeter at some point. I'm not super confident they can do that on either side of the ball. Obviously, this is one of the best receiving cores in the league. I think you have 2 receivers who are going to be high picks. And Vanderbilt, I just don't think has the corners to match receivers like that. I'm not sure they have corners to match average SEC receivers, though. I think Colby Taylor is really talented. I think Martel Height's really talented. I just can't go out there and trust that they're going to even slow down a guy like Luther Burden. And I think today you saw that Luther Burden just continually made plays. It wasn't the best game of his career, but he did enough for Mizzou to be able to find him consistently and for him to make a difference on the game in a way that I think Vanderbilt was probably expecting, but was trying to do everything to protect themselves from. Luther Burden was just too much for them today, though, and I think on the perimeter as a whole, that's where my concern lies. They obviously got gashed up front defensively, and that was probably the biggest difference I saw in the game was Mizzou's offensive line and running game versus Vanderbilt's defensive front. But also, I look at the perimeter, and Pavia threw for 178 yards. They haven't had lofty passing numbers all season. Last year was their best, and that was their worst loss of the season because they were playing catch up from behind the whole time. That's why their passing numbers were high. I thought today they did some good things in the passing game, but also I just don't know if their guys create enough separation, and I don't know if their passing attack as a whole is one that any SEC team is consistently going to be afraid of.
Yeah, Lucy chimes in here. Pavia doesn't see wide open Skinner several times tonight. This can be fixed. I think there's some truth to that. You know, you go back in the film room. I think a little bit of that is the offensive line giving him a few more seconds, a couple more seconds on some of those plays. Joey, I did think the offensive line was better than last week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they weren't great by any means tonight, but I thought they did. Enough, especially at times in the running game, whether it was Cedric Alexander or Pavia. But offensively, there's got to be more options outside. There has to be. You look at Missouri, and you run through their stat line. They had Burden 6 catches, a couple of touchdowns. Weiss 5 catches. Norfleet had 3. Noel had 3, and then Carroll had 2. That's going to win you a game, and they had a lot of mistakes. The kicker missed 3 field goals. So, but you have that, their out pitch is they have confidence on the outside with their receivers. And for Vanderbilt, what's their out pitch if the run game's not working? I think that's my concern. I would say Stowers at this point.
Yeah.
And Stowers had another really good game. And maybe that's enough, Joey. Maybe that's enough to go down and beat Auburn and go up and beat Kentucky, And I, maybe that's where they're at. Maybe this, offensively, they're sitting here saying, okay, we've got these receivers, but we love Stowers enough to give him, almost 10 catches a game. So, we'll see. I still think this effort tonight, Joey, what I want to get at your main theme. Like what are you coming away encouraged about what this team can do the rest of the season? Because I am, and it's disappointing because this team could be 4-0 if you look at it, but instead they're 2-2, and that's where they sit. But I'm interested to get your take on that because I think it is encouraging, and mainly because it's still early in the season. You get a bye week, and I know you've got Alabama, and then you got Ball State, and then Texas. But I just think what I saw tonight, I saw enough to where if Pavia can stay healthy, same with Stowers, and the defense continues to get better, I think this team down the stretch of the season can win some games.
Yeah, I feel encouraged, Billy. And I know that people don't want to hear that at this point because obviously that's a pretty hard loss to swallow, losing in that way and with some of the mental mistakes they had. I think they can go beat Auburn with a game like that, though. And I think that would be a huge step for this team going in and doing what they did today and pushing Mizzou. Obviously, Mizzou didn't play its best game. It missed 3 field goals. I thought it made some miscues itself. But I thought Vanderbilt was good enough to win an SEC game today if it didn't play a top 10 team on the road, if that makes sense. They're close to a 4-0 start, like Clay says. And I think that's maybe not something to take heart in, but that's something to acknowledge and realize is a thing. I think they're good enough to where they can go beat an SEC team. And I think we always kind of thought that, but I don't think we saw as much proof of concept as we did today until now. Vanderbilt, I think, has enough when it's locked in mentally and when it's sharp and when it's playing with confidence to go beat an SEC team. And I think they have that capability. We saw that today. Now they've got to clean some things up, right? But I think they're a lot closer than we thought they were a month ago. And I think
that's a good way of putting it. That they're closer than we thought. And I mean, at this point, to come up that close against a Missouri team, and again, maybe they're not a top 10 team, but Vanderbilt wasn't expected to compete tonight. They were, 18-point line, I think is what it got down to.
Mm-hmm.
So again, encouraged. The moral victories. I think that's encouraging though, that Clark doesn't, I mean, he rejects that. I thought you had a good question there in the post game. That's actually already up on our YouTube, but just asking.
Yeah. I wonder who got that one.
Oh yeah. Did you?
I'm messing with it. Yeah.
But no, Joey, I just think We got some funny comments coming in here. I thought it was interesting Clark gave that answer. He's very, I think, mentally headstrong with this team. And the responses from players, Joey, that, Longwell comes in here and says, no, we're not, I wouldn't say it's a sad feeling. I think this motivates us. I think this motivates us even more. And then Pavia, he comes up there and says, we're an inch away. We just got to clean up the small things. I think that's interesting. Last year, look, some of the responses, just weren't like that from this team. So I think that's what has changed. But Joe in here in the chat, there were two key plays late that hurt Luther Burton on the out and up for the touchdown in overtime, and then Chase Mitchell getting beat for a sack when Pavia could have run in for a score in overtime. Those couple plays were big. I don't want to narrow this game down to overtime, though. I do, if Brock Taylor hits the 50-yarder, that's a tough kick. It's a 50-yarder. If he hits that, Vanderbilt wins the game. Missouri's probably sitting here saying the same thing. If we hit one of those three, it's probably a different outcome too. But overtime was important, and I think Vanderbilt. What did you think about? Did you think Vanderbilt was playing for overtime there late? Obviously, they took a couple of knees, so they were. But there was a good bit of time left, Joey. And I guess did Vanderbilt have one timeout left there late?
I think they had one, and I think it would have been. Obviously, people are going to want them to go there. I think it's probably a smart move to take it into OT just because of how far back they were. And I don't know if they had enough time and you haven't seen the downfield passing game be a threat.
Right.
I think that was probably the right move to stay there.
Right. And you've won a game in overtime with Pavia already. I think you trust overtime, Pavia. You trust him in overtime. And but yeah, those two plays there. I vaguely remember that sack that Chase Mitchell let up, but obviously we remember the bird and out and up. And Tyson Russell was in coverage there. I think there needs to be a little bit more awareness, maybe defensively. Tyson Russell is he's great in run support, Joey, but we've seen it seen it a lot the last couple of years, from even going back to before when you covered this team. I think that's something on film that teams recognize. If you've got number 8 on an island, you need to attack them. And again, nothing again. Right.
They've just had so many breakdowns. And I think you're going to get there eventually. But
yeah,
you look at the Virginia Tech game, the Trudell Berry breakdown, Virginia Tech at the end, Ted Hurst scores not Virginia Tech, Georgia State, Ted Hurst scores a touchdown. Today you have the Luther Burden one. I think you were going to get there eventually, but I wanted to assist you towards that too. They've had so many huge breakdowns, and for a defense that has talked about how detailed they are and how their schemes are a lot more sound and they're better structurally, you can't have that happen as often as it does.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This defense that it's not like they look out of sync or I think they're focused and locked in. Some of the run fits, they would go in a totally opposite hole of the run, and then boom, the run from Noel there. It can't happen. You've got to be more disciplined on defense. And CJ Taylor wasn't. That was right out of the half. He gets in there, and one player was out of position, and that was CJ Taylor. A lot of times on those run plays, it's up to one guy. It could be up to the safety to fit that hole. So either way, Joey, obviously a brutal game for Vanderbilt. Brock Taylor, feel for him, those clutch kicks. And I think it's good. Those have been early in the season. So I think later in the season, maybe he's able to learn from those. But we'll wrap up here, Joey. And again, appreciate everybody coming in here with some comments and questions. Final thoughts. Obviously, this team 2-2. Joey, they got a bye week next week, and then you've got Alabama coming in. But where do you sit with this team right now?
I don't think I sit in a terrible spot with them. I was generally thinking I was being realistic, thinking they were going to be a 3-9 team, maybe a 4-8 team heading into the season. And I feel a lot better about them now than I did then. I think you've got a lot of reason to believe that they can outperform that. And obviously Georgia State hurts, but I think they're a lot better than we thought. I think if they're on, they have what they need to win a few games in this league. And I think that's a big win for them at this point. They've got to bring it in those games. And them showing up the way they did today as 18-point underdogs, I think is a great thing. But you look at the heartbreak and just thinking about what if this would have been Clark Lee's best win throughout his tenure, I think. This would have been his signature win, his crown jewel, whatever you want to call it. And they go back to Nashville with nothing. Obviously, that's a tough pill to swallow for them. But as you go through the week, you kind of start to forget about some of the mental miscues. I think on Wednesday, you're going to be thinking a lot more about the way they competed and the way they were in a game with this team. Obviously, it's a sour taste to go in the bye, but I think there's more out there for this team than we originally thought. And today, I think, showed you that. I think this team has more to them. They have more of an edge. And I think something we haven't talked about yet is just the way they responded. Last week, you talked about the Georgia State week to where they run focused, they run disciplined. I thought they had a better week this week from every account we had, and I thought it showed up. So I think they're made of the right things. It's just got to show up more consistently. There's some issues. The run defense thought was an issue today. Thought the downfield passing game was an issue, the penalties. But I think there's enough in there with this team that you look at and say, well, maybe they've got something. I don't know exactly what that something is, but I don't feel terrible coming out of today if I'm Vanderbilt, especially relative to the expectations they had preseason. I think if you tell us before the game they're going to lose to Mizzou by 3 in double overtime, I don't think you feel terrible about that, especially with the offensive PI call. Vanderbilt hung in there today with a team that's ranked in the top 10 at their house. I don't think it's a terrible thing at all. Obviously, leave with a sour taste in your mouth, though.
Yeah, and obviously impressive the way they stayed in it. And I mean, it was 2020. It felt like for forever. I think courtesy of some of those missed kicks, and Missouri played a bad game. Vanderbilt played not a great game, but I think a good enough game to win. But Lester's comment here, so close, would be huge to get this win, but lots to play for with this team. There's still a lot to play for. They got eight games left, and it'll start here in a couple weeks with Alabama coming to town in Nashville, and we will be there. But Vanderbilt's got a bye week here coming up. They lose to Missouri 30-27 in double overtime. And again, big thanks to our sponsors, Magic Mind here, a big time sponsor of VandySports.com. You can log on to their website, magicmind.com/VandySports. Get 48% off a subscription, 20% off a one-time purchase at magicmind.com. Joey, thanks again, man, and get your reports done. I got to get my defensive report card out there.
All right, Billy. Thanks for having me. And I think brighter times ahead for this team. I think you look at today and you just think there's more out there for them than what they showed throughout last week's game. And today I think is a game that you're going to have a sour taste in your mouth for the rest of the weekend maybe, but big picture, I think there's a lot of positive to take from it that's probably overshadowed at the moment.
Yeah, this team's 2-2, and obviously they could be 3-1, could be 4-0, but they're close. They're close. They're right there, and got to clean up some small things. And I don't think frustration. Obviously you're frustrated, but I don't think that's a fix, right? You got to go back in, watch film, and I think there are a lot of fixable things out there for this team. So again, Alabama here in a couple weeks, but that'll do it for the post-game show. That's Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick saying so long from another Vandy Sports podcast.